begin with the first question.
Oh, I have the option of leaving the meeting. That's very tempting. Continue. So anyway, yes, Keith Riggs checking in from Bern, Switzerland, where it's mostly cloudy, but far better than it was 2 hours ago when it was blowing sideways and torrential rains. And I asked my wife if it was really okay that she goes out for a walk with our black flat coat retriever. Meanwhile, upstairs, my son, 22 years old, student of environmental system science at, so what do you call it? The technical, what is it? The MIT of Switzerland. ETH. Yeah. And his girlfriend from Holland, a bit of a hard story, very hard story. A woman who's really having to start from scratch, very traumatized.
Okay.
But it is not something I like to do to share without people in the room on such things. But he really picked a very challenging topic person. And he's standing up and doing it, which I take my hat off, because at 22 years old, taking on something really, really major in relationship building, relationship and personal growth is something to really appreciate. Yeah. So
that basically says that you did a great job in bringing this boy up.
He's got a sister. She's amazing. Also, the little tapestry, whatever, the piece of cloth behind is a wood block print from multiple block prints, of course, from Japan on fabric. My sister is a translator from Japanese to English since 45 years. She's 71 now. And we grew up in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. My parents came from South Dakota. I think I mentioned in our conversation before that his father was Robert I. Riggs, and their father was Thomas Lawrence Riggs, who was missionary to Lakota. And his father was missionary to Lakota and creator of the first dictionary and Bible in the Lakota language back in the 1850s. Craftsmanship was part of my upbringing. We really appreciated the arts and crafts techniques. I went to an alternative school based on the Alexander movement technique. Maybe you know something about it. Alexander Foundation School was a split off from the first disciples of F. Matthias Alexander in Pennsylvania, that kind of was somehow sheltered with the Quaker community of World War II. It's a very interesting story, but quite complex. My parents found themselves in Philadelphia as alternative service to World War II. They were very active against fighting in Europe. At that point, they were both devout believers from a Protestant point of view, and really led an alternative life, setting up, my mom set up a health food store, and helped that to feed her 6 children so she could buy food in quantity. We had a great root cellar. My dad built our house with his own hands, a big sprawling 1-floor place in the forest that is now got taken over by all the subdivisions of Philadelphia growing west towards Amish country. And that's where I grew up to until my mom, despite living a good life of health foods and being a kind and gracious person, her name was Grace, died of cancer. In our eyes, suddenly, because they didn't tell us that she'd been battling cancer for 4 years. That's one of the traumatic experiences in my life that basically cut me off from loving for many years, and appreciating myself and a lot of other things at the age of 14.
How old were you when that happened?
14 and a half.
Wow. Okay.
Not a good time.
Yeah.
From my perspective. So anyway, and then my dad lost it. I mean, she was the love of his life, and they were really, really true, amazing partners. And he lost his job within 4 months because he couldn't, as a teacher, he was a high school teacher for mathematics, trained in chemistry originally. And so he went off to seek a new life in Australia. So I moved to Sydney, Australia as a 15-year-old and lived there for 2 years, the last 8 months on my own, because I couldn't stand him anymore at 16 years old. Mm-hmm. Maybe I couldn't stand myself. I don't know. That's always a question at 16. Mm-hmm. And then after 20 months, we returned, but he didn't want to go home. He sold the house for a penny, practically, compared to what would happen later on in that marketplace, and used the money to put me through college. So mm-hmm. I went to a very good private liberal arts college in Oregon for 2 years, and then I had to drop out and make my own money for a year and a half, and then I could go back and finish. And my studies were in intellectual history and physics. I had to drop the physics because I wasn't good at staying up all night doing calculus problems. Just wasn't interesting. At the same time, I'd already started in that time in between, I started teaching skiing, and I taught skiing after university, that first degree, not quite finished, but that's another story later. So I taught skiing for 11 years, and I rose up very easily through and became a certified, and then a coach and an examiner for ski instructors. And yeah, I mean, now with the bald-haired guy, it's like, who cares? But there was part of me, it led me to have a great appreciation for performance, mm-hmm. being totally connected to what you're feeling so you can do it better, mm-hmm. to being, to loving this mm-hmm. amazing ability to channel energy and balance it at speed in all kinds of conditions. I taught skiing in Oregon, where we would go out in every condition. It could be raining, whatever, snowing, whatever. You had to go out, you had to do your job, and you had to make it fun, no matter what. So that was really a founding experience. And I built houses then for 8 years, and then I met my wife in 1990, my current, and that was 1990, and I came over to finish ski teaching as a profession. And we got talking. She's a graphic designer by training. You maybe know the logo from WWF, that came from her hand. The panda bear, the little panda bear came from her hand when she worked in California for long.
Nice.
And a few others that you maybe recognize. So anyway, long story, we went back and forth for 7 years. Neither one wanted to jump. She didn't want to come back to California, and I didn't, and I wasn't formed enough to know what I was doing. But very quickly it became clear that I could take my will to innovate and go to design school. So I went to California College of Art, which is one of the best design schools in California, and amazing professors out of Silicon Valley and from the arts and crafts side. And it's an art school, plus it's also architecture, illustration, interior, and graphic, and so you're all in one roof, and it becomes this wonderful think tank experience with all these high energy people. That was 1990 to 1994. I had luck enough to go to TED 5 in 1994 as a student helper, and got to listen to some amazing people and be in that space in Monterey. Um, yeah, and I was racing sailboats on weekends for five summers and 2 winters, and windsurfing and rock climbing, and just loving what one's body can do. And that was kind of the principle of my 20s is, hey, I've got this really amazing body, and I love finding out what it can do and just going off and doing stuff, you know, and that was really fun. And then design school kind of put me on a new trajectory. And then so from a developmental and a professional and lack of maturity side, I stupidly asked Jenny to be my wife. And that meant I had to make the decision to move here, which was complete suicide. It was, and people tried to tell me in San Francisco, look, there's no design scene that is worth anything in Switzerland unless you want to stick inside these rigid blockhead boundaries in 1995. It just doesn't exist. You know, it's all, you know, elbowing each other, and so yeah. But anyway, I asked her, and she accepted, and we started a life, and therefore 2 kids came very quickly, because at 40 years old, you don't have a lot of choices about whether you're going to have kids or not. And right after I asked her to marry, she said, would it be okay if we didn't have children? And I said, that would be a waste of a good father.
Okay.
It was right out of my heart, and it was true. And so that was the legacy that I gave for 22 years now. And that was a great decision. Yeah. So already when Rachel turned 16, I said, okay, now it's time to get off my ass and do something besides. Oh, what I didn't say is I built furniture for the 20 years between 96 and 97 and 2007. You need to take something?
No, but I'm going to switch it off so it doesn't disturb us.
That's all right. I just
No, we're here.
And so I designed and built furniture as something I could do on the side while taking care of the family. And I could do that 30 to 50%, but my ideas were always too crazy and not necessarily lucrative. I never made money in those 20 years enough to pay for this family. And that is also a huge pain point for me. And I'm still kind of stuck there. So for instance, I make things like paper lamps. It's not original. You can buy all sorts of paper lamps from on the market now, but that was a nice little project.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Tables and chairs, and yeah, all my own designs, and it just was kind of onesie twosies, small series, and yeah, individual. Plenty of happy customers, but not enough to pay the bills. And that's why that's still very much with me, is how do I make money? I also did things like I did front ends for websites for Jenny. She's a graphic designer. She couldn't do the website, so I would do mock-ups and did a couple classes in system, design, and yeah, I played around with HTML, but I was never any good at it. So I'll just let it go to say I am acquainted with a few things, but as you see from my website, I'm not very much in control of it. So let's see. And then in 2017, I basically said, okay, making furniture and doing interiors and things like that. So like, for instance, I remodeled our house. We bought it in 2009, and then I remodeled it for 4 months and moved in. And so it's really our home. And that's actually one of the things I can say with complete integrity is I am a full stack home designer, doer, maker, all the way from how one builds the place, how one inhabits the place, all the various cycles and value chains that are present within a home. And if you're interested later on, or even now, you can see a mock-up for a website I did called My Oikos. And My Oikos.
What's it called?
Oikos. You know what the oikos is, right?
No, I'm not sure.
It's the ancient Greek.
Okay, so yeah, okay, now I get it. Yes.
And that was an effort to, well, I'll just quick show it to you if I can find it quickly. Let's see. Yeah, I just looked at it yesterday, so let me load it, and then I can share the screen with you. And back to Zoom and share screen. Okay, so are you with me?
It should be coming up. Yeah, it's coming up, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so you see
So yeah, and I know that house. I've also bought it for a website before.
Okay, it was a good picture for this. So My Oikos, for all the value flowing through your home. One of the things that's really clear to me is that our tax system, our accounting systems are at the service of paying your taxes and understanding a linear capitalist way of being a consumer. Your house, for instance, is owned by the bank. You buy stuff, you use it, you throw it away. And so there's all these flows going through your house. And the question is, if we want to make a sustainable society, then we have to basically help people become aware of all this value flowing through the home. And originally the oikos in Greece was the landowner, the owner of the family, the prince, with all of his slaves, but also the property and all the economic capability of that piece of property. And the concept is that there's a lot more potential to, is it going to reload? Yes. There's a lot more potential to be much more sustainable if we really are conscious about how we live. And it's also a way to link the generations, and the kids could become much more conscious of buying clothes, what it really means in terms of clothes, textile cycle, vacation planning, why we use the car to take you to tennis practice, violin lessons, whatever, all the little choices. Because if you look at my house, having one fewer child has so much more impact than living car-free. For instance, not having a car is 2.3 tons of carbon per year, whereas having a child is over 55 tons of carbon, because of all of the choices that we make because we have that child. And it's really interesting. The impact of one fewer child is, maybe you've seen the drawdown model.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know very well that educating women about family planning is the 5th or 6th most important thing that one can do for climate and drawing down our impact on the earth. So anyway, I went ahead and I made children choices, mobility, air travel, and I wrote little columns about each thing: meat, dairy, energy uses. And then I gave a self-discipline, whoops, that I didn't mean, self-organizing, self-awareness building set of steps that you can follow in order to basically draw down your own impact. And then I said, we can make this into a graphically expressed system, and that would be you basically set up your bookkeeping in an Excel sheet, or we can supply the bookkeeping side and then people can enter their non-monetary value flows along with their standard value flows and come up with a much more coherent way of looking at what is the value flowing through the home. Of course, you can choose from GitHub, you can find any sort of graphic display you want. You're much more aware of it than I am. But anyway, here's what was attractive to me at the time, where you have income one, income two, income rental, Ricardo sales, solar roof, surplus, energy, etc. And then various negative factors at the bottom of the graphic. What are your ecosystem risks, your material risk, your fluid risk, your structural risks, in other words, and various uncertainty costs. And then at the top, all of the credits you get for being a better global citizen. And so anyway, this was the prototype, and then it went into different ways of sharing and reselling. And the third category here, household, garden, and then it should be neighborhood, about how we're sharing in our local neighborhood. So this was the prototype that I made, and basically almost nobody saw it because I ran out of, it was far too complicated, and then people had to want to read. It needed to be an app. And when I showed it to WWF, they just said, yeah, but we have our own app. And it's not doing the same thing. It's not nearly as bringing in the whole picture and tying it into an accounting system so people can really manage, see what they're doing, and understand how it fits into more than finance, to actually being part of the 8 currency value awareness system. I showed it to you because they know that I do more than furniture, but I can't do more than what I just did there. That's a WordPress template, set of templates, and And the question is, yeah, I could find some people to do the app, but it's 20,000, and I don't have market, and I need the income, but I can't move it from where I am to where it needs to be in order to actually be viable. And probably it's the wrong concept because it hasn't been tested.
No, that's the point. You need to test these things, and then. But
I know that. So
I'd like to pick up and move into my second question, and I'd like to pick up on your skills of skiing, which I am lacking. So my son, who's 11 years old, he gets bored when I go skiing with him. And in about exactly 1 year ago, we were in Italy. He was there with his mom and her husband and his sister, and I just came to visit for 2 or 3 days to admire his skiing skills and try to also slide down the hill. And when I think I'm going fast, he still is bored. And so at one point he decided, I was just going behind him, and at one point he decided he's going down this patch with some ramps. And I naively went into that. And the first I could manage. The second, I fell hard, and I fell on my back, and my whole rib cage was compressed, and it was painful to breathe for 2 months.
Ouch! Ouch!
So I'd like to tie that into your that skill set that you have of building places, homes, because that is a important skill that if you're lacking it, it might be painful as well. Just like my missing ski skills were extremely painful.
Building homes or building
Building homes, yeah.
Okay.
Building homes, not having, so places create the quality of a place has the potential to create culture. There's a story, not a story. This happened. Bernard Lietaer was called up by the Belgian government to ask about whether he had an idea how to solve a problem with illegal immigrants in Ghent, in the city of Ghent. And the way he solved that was that the place was totally desolate. People didn't really have jobs, not legal jobs anyway, because they couldn't. And he went there to ask people, what do you dream of? And it turned out they dreamt of a little plot of land so they could grow salad or something like that. And so he organized a piece of land that was owned by the city, and he made it accessible through a currency that you could earn by making your neighborhood beautiful and nice and friendly. And in next to nothing, that whole situation turned, which then was replicated across Belgium and other cities. So we know, not only from that, but that's a very practical example, and I heard it from Bernard personally. We know that our spaces have a concrete influence on our behavior, and this is what I'm referring to when I say that building good homes is a vital skill. But I don't want to limit you to that. So let me now bind this into the main question, which is, you're somewhere in the outback of the world. I don't care where. You can choose a spot or do it in the abstract, but you're somewhere in the outback, disconnected from civilization. That's the important part. And you're with 500 people, 100 to 1,000 people, something like that. And you're building a community. And there are many things that need to be done, like building houses, like cultivating the land, creating culture, creating governance, all of that. From your perspective, from your knowledge, from your skills, from your life experience, what would you intuitively, from the top of your head, say is the important things to do, and what would you be doing in such a situation?
What would I be doing? So I guess what's really new with me and I appreciate is systemic constellation work, where the land and its people is a part I really love playing. When it comes to modeling complex systems, it's usually a good idea to start with who and where you are, and really take time for that. And visit it often because only the people, one of the things that I noticed as I was sketching Maslow's hierarchy of needs this morning, wondering why I'm not really attending to Maslow's hierarchy of needs so well myself in terms of basic needs sometimes. And I thought, the wonderful thing about a eco-village or a group of people who choose to come together for a cause is often at there's a critical mass of how many people is necessary. There's enough people who have the ability to generate outside income or attract funding or whatever is needed as external resources so that there can be an internal metabolism. That's one of the problems with small cooperatives, is that they usually are too much internally looking in. They're looking in all the time and they don't actually understand themselves and the basic needs that are being driven there. So the question is, why are we in that space? Or is it their space? Or are they colonists? And if they're colonists, then it won't work. it will be the same old bullshit. It always happens.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So can you elaborate on that a little bit? That's interesting.
Because, for instance, so the stories that people are carrying from their past, why are they there? Well, either there's a wonderful quote that I saw: sooner or later in your life, you must address the question, what are you running away from? Why are you here? And what are you running towards? Thurber, I think I forget the first name, I just quoted it the other day. And when people are coming together from all over the place, often they're running, some of them are running away, some are running towards the cause. But that needs to be spoken of. The stories that are present from both sides, the running towards, the running away from, what is present in that space that they are imagining is fundamental to the quality of what will emerge. The actual buildings, the buildings are the context. First, they're shelter. They should be as simple to make as possible with very low investment, because hopefully the people will, in the process of building the first iteration, find out more about themselves and realize what they could do. Nobody has enough imagination, except for maybe a few star architects, to work in a large collective and steer a process that will come to a coherent outcome in all at once. Okay, there's too many competing visions. There's going to be too many traumas from some people's past, or visionaries who are going off on their own way. And you can read the history of colonies. It's a set of tragedies. I'm just reading Barry Lopez's book, Horizon, where decade after decade for almost 200 years, various idea creators would come to the Galapagos Island and fuck it up in yet another wave of colonizers or people trying to create a new land.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there needs to be a great deal of integrity between the people and the land. They need to be, at least a good solid portion of them need to be indigenous.
Okay.
So that there's a continuity of the stories that come from that land. There's a real quality that has resonance and is radiant for that group of people. And the other people have to be willing, I feel, this is my opinion now.
What I'm interested in.
This is my opinion, not being in that space in that time, that the process will eventually cause many people to leave and maybe new ones to come. In other words, the waves of nomadic buying in, checking out, renewal are just normal in any ecosystem. It's part of human ecosystems as well as natural ecosystems. And we really need to pay attention to that. I mean, there's, of course, I'm a big follower and a big appreciator of Daniel Christian Ball. And I look to him and what's her name, Sanders, who's been writing about regenerative economics for decades. And yeah, they've done the work. They're scientists, they're careful, clear thinkers. So while I really appreciate my interest and my ability to be in a space, to facilitate spaces for people, and I would not presume or assume that I know enough to actually guide a really large process. That has to happen with other people. a group of elders, you could even say, you know. So did you get enough of an answer to your question?
Well, I could hear Daniel and also Joe Brewer in what you said. I had a conversation of this format with Joe, and Daniel is going to be up in the next couple of weeks sometime. One of my partners is already engaged in conversations with him. So yeah, I heard that influence, but let's say there's no excuse. You're out there. You cannot call up Daniel and ask him how he would do it. Maybe you are in the role of the elder in that community. So what do?
You listen. You listen.
Listen.
And you take little steps, little doable steps. Like, okay, we're all living in tents. For instance, I don't know where we are. I mean, is there housing? Is there no housing?
Nothing. No, you start in the jungle, and then you can play with that.
First of all, I wouldn't take the project on.
It's not a project. It's a necessity of life.
No, so, I'm saying that from nothing, I would not start. The risks and the doability are not.
So what would you bring? What would you bring?
First of all, the people who are showing up would have to be a high enough level of survival. So have enough equipment and have enough resources so that you would have their own shelter as a basis. Otherwise, you don't even begin. I'm not going to create tents for 500 people. And
no, but of course not. But what would they need to bring? What would they need to bring?
Depends on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing, I guess, is an appreciation for the risks and the context of the place they're going to. And then I guess the first thing would be to, so if everybody has a tent and everybody can safely have shelter and enough food, there's enough food from outside, then basically I would do almost a month of exploring what is there. Basic, finding out, really going down to the core relationship of what can the people do for themselves and how does that fit with that particular piece of land. Because you can't start doing crops, you find out where the water is, you find out how the terrain is, you go exploring, you get curious about what plants are there, you go find out what plants could already give you food or are dangerous, which snakes, which bugs. You really understand your context. And you listen to the weather, you listen to the wind, you listen to each other. You really be in the place for 3 to 4 weeks, and that will already give you a good sense of who's really able to stay the course. When you race sailboats or go offshore on a sailboat, everyone on board has to be competent. Everyone. If you can't do your job, you don't belong there. If somebody has duty from 2 to 5 a.m. to drive the boat, they are not allowed to fall asleep. You could hit a container, you could not steer the right way or wrap through some waves, you're screwed. So it is fundamental that everybody be competent enough to do the basis. Otherwise, it doesn't work, And that all depends. And if you're trying to shoot for a really high level, then it's a little bit like, what is the basic requirement to be part of a symphony orchestra? You have had to do a lot of work to get to where you have satisfied the criteria to be accepted into a symphony orchestra. So if we're really trying to create a new society for self-fulfillment and appreciating the next level, then people who are entering into this process already have to have done a lot of self-work and are be super aware of how they are in a group context, probably with sociolocracy yeah. In other words, processes by which we get along and make decisions
How
together.
would you know that people have done that work?
Hmm?
How would you know that people have done that work?
You can tell probably in the first 15 minutes of how we sit together, you know, is do they listen and how do they show up and are they present, and just run a couple of simple tests. How do we decide what's for lunch today?
Okay, so you would iterate your way from the very, very basics, slowly and deliberately, learning from each other and the environment.
Yeah.
So from crashing there with a bunch of tents and axes, and having conversations and solving problems together, and slowly learning about the environment, each other, building slowly. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
A bit tedious, but you did throw me basically off the earth and with no internet connection as far as I'm aware. So that means you really have to start from the basics of survival.
Yeah, okay. So let's move through this into like a future of like 6 to 12 months after you crash there. You have the first shelters of some sort. You have built bamboo huts or super adobe domes or earthship type of things, or all these types of shelters that you can build with the material around you, and certain rules and some culture has emerged. What do you think, for just from your intuition and experience, what would that look like after 6 to 12 months?
So I'm a storyteller, and so I really appreciate that story sharing would be and creating a culture of being able to share often in various situations what one is discovering, and that's knowledge base of all sorts of different kinds of knowledge. I have a note here: Wissen zu schaffen oder schaffen zu wissen, a dialogue of learning, which is you can have people with knowledge that give it into for others to use, but the act of working creates a pool of knowledge for everyone to use. Mm-hmm. And this is really important. It's kind of actually one of the things that's kind of got split apart is the farmers who make cheese, really fine cheese, and the academics in the food school, food and agriculture school. If the agriculture school guy says, yeah, try this new bacteria then the farmer might say, look, I used that 30 years ago, and because of some funny things about where I live, the minerals, it really fucks things up. Let me tell you about this cheese. Here's a piece. Here's a piece. What do you think? And then the scientist says, that's impossible. You can't use that particular the bacteria in this. It won't work. And so you end up with this really funny dialogue between people who know, who try to tell other people, and people who do in order to know. And I think those are the conversations that are really fun, because it creates regenerative learning. And that would be the culture that I would want to see after a year of really building coherence together throughout the culture. Whether it be construction techniques, there's some beautiful things you can do with bamboo, bamboo houses. You can make wonderful clay structures, especially if you if you happen to have some straw around that you can use as fortifying. There's ways to find water and create microclimates. The amount of technology that's been researched and developed, I'm sure you're also aware, is fantastic. Where humans are by nature curious and innovative, and so it's often with the right attitude, the correct the richtige Haltung, kann man ganz viel schaffen.
Yes.
What is there after 12 months? Probably various levels of completion of various architectures, developing organically from the people with their visions. Some of them will not be livable. Most of them can be if there's a good exchange in a what is the word, in a respectful way. Respect first and mutual appreciation as a core value in the culture. Then you can have really a nice continuous sharing of knowledge and continual learning.
So that type of regenerative knowledge creation that you refer to, or learning, requires people to be able to let go and listen. And even if you filter, like you said, through in the beginning, through what are we going to have for lunch, that is a pretty mundane exercise that still can go wrong, but just because that goes right doesn't mean that people can let go or listen in other situations that they're more attached to. So inevitably you will run into situations where people where conflict arises around that. How would you deal with that conflict?
So here's this pile of floating books. I'll just kind of like hand them over to you so you can appreciate. These are some of my favorites of the last year. Are the titles backwards?
No, I can see them. Yeah.
Okay, so the bottom one is from my studies in intellectual history, but the fifth discipline, only connect. Let's see, the black and red one, which is sitting in the fire. Sitting in the fire, and community are how you go about solving exactly such situations. Sitting in the fire is about dealing with co-leadership in areas where there's stored trauma. And actually, I'm doing a 5-day workshop with Daniel Alftemauer on conflict facilitation in February. I hope it can happen because we will only do it if we can do it present. And he's a specialist who studied trauma work for many years. He's also a national level photographer who does pretty amazing work. And so I'm looking forward to that training. It's not a radical collaboration. I've looked at that and I like the work. but I think I'm going to head towards the trauma, because there's enough trauma in me that I need to, that part of what makes it attractive is to process it by diving into it. So it's an interesting study. And then community is also, you know, Peter Block, fantastic work about him. He does it in Cleveland, Ohio. Basically community building, it's dialogue practices and how to go about small group, the power of the small group, leadership and convening, designing physical space that supports community. These are just chapters in the book. And yes, and that was these two were part of my dialogue facilitation training. So that was 2018, and leading dialogues to resolve for community or community self-activation awareness building is something that I appreciate doing.
How would that look in concrete terms? So what do you, there's me, I'm super stubborn, I want to do this in a specific way, and there's somebody else who knows better, and we just cannot resolve this. How does it work? What happens?
Well, depends on whether they make trouble in the group or whether they can be left alone to find 2 followers or 3 followers, and they go try it out until they find out what works and doesn't work. You know, head to head, when somebody is super stubborn, is not a viable way to get over it, especially if they're creating more trauma in the group by fighting.
Okay, so as long as you can put it into an experiment, that works. I totally agree. That's good. What if you can't put it into an experiment?
So, for instance, if you have such a stubborn person, we do what we call the fishbowl technique, which is we find 3 other people, 3 to 4 other people, and we literally sit them in the middle of the larger circle and listen and boil. We sit in the fire together until we figure out what it is that's stuck and really and the larger circle of people is holding the space, says nothing, but simply acts as the community holding space for the conflict which needs to be resolved. And expressing first and last appreciation for the voice that is needing to be heard. Because somebody who has that much leadership, they're stubborn, they're strong enough to have a voice, will continue to make ripple effects no matter what. So it's important to give it a voice and to contain it, but at the same time expressing very clearly that we always show respect, and we speak from our own selves and not projecting onto all the other people, you did this, you did that, and to just set the basic rules of dialogue, which is to enter in the interests of solutions that work for more than oneself. And if that is not accepted as respect for the larger group and awareness-based approach, then the person needs to go off for a walk for a while and will not be accepted until they figure out, hey, first of all, we will not stand for disrespect, and we will not enter into a process which is not good for the larger story that's happening in this space. And
expelling as a method for sanctions.
Yeah, it's a sanction. It's usually if somebody who's very mature goes with them, to have a voice to listen, an ear to listen. Otherwise, the fuming and the self-fulfilling processes continue, and then there will be some negative repercussions. So yeah, typically when we have a really difficult person, one of the facilitators, and we try really hard not to facilitate alone. There's at least two, and it's even better if there's a small body of 3 or 4 people who have done a training, so that they can literally hold the space, and if there's and that there's multiple viewpoints about what is the field that is opened and how is it being held in a way that's constructive for the entire group.
Mm-hmm. So this sitting in a circle reminds me of several things. I think the Hadza or Maasai, they have this song for every person that they sing in situations like that, and also when the person is sick. And out of South Africa, there's this term Boma, which Lara, who founded TEDx, adopted for her new project, which is the circle of elders who sit in a circle until they have resolved the problem. So this is exactly what you're describing here. Mm-hmm. So with all of that in place, and you're growing this, and let's say now it's 5 years ahead, things have solidified.
Yeah.
People now, there's embodied knowledge about almost everything in the group, and let's say some climate collapses happened. So just the climatic environment for some strange reason changes. So things that you've done that worked out well in the last 5 years don't work so well anymore. Mm-hmm. But people now are used to that. They know it's done that way. So how do you bring the potential that you started in the beginning of small iterations, openness, flexibility, adaptability? How do you keep that as a cultural element over time, so you can adapt to changing environments?
So there's a few skills. I really like the now I've forgotten the name of the 2 temples in Japan that are taken apart and rebuilt every 20 years, so that the next generation learns how to do the master craftsmanship necessary to rebuild these wooden structures. And that's been going on for something like 30 generations. It's beautiful. And that's also a characteristic of the Amish traditions as far as woodworking goes, is this continual apprenticeship for the next generation, so that there's inherent, or intrinsic in the community, this sense of being able to build anew. So just on a skill level, there's a skill level. Okay, we'll not say what's exactly in the skill level. And then there's the trading level. So is this normal? The community is not closed. It's not a closed domain. Maybe there's hundreds of these domains around the earth. Hopefully there's some trading going on, like Eco-Village network. So there's always something in terms of developing innovation capability from learning from others, from outside the pod. And then there's an appreciation for learning between the generations, which kind of goes back to this apprenticeship idea. And then there's appreciating what brings, how would you say, a unification of multiple value, which I think would be a continually able to be revisited way of innovating. It's like, okay, we've become so good at what we do in this colony that we don't need any external capital. So we've forgotten about external capital. But suddenly conditions shift and we need some external capital, of some kind. Maybe it's material resources that don't exist, or maybe it's, knowledge. And now I lost my train.
So environment changes, you need some external capital, and you've lost along the way because of your independence before.
Because of our economic independence, we've gotten so into the spiritual and the cultural and the ability to create our own food. And Maslow's pyramid is now a really nice woven set of relationships from where you're meditating one moment in the garden while pulling weeds or whatever needs to be done to take care of crops, or you're mending socks like my mother did, because you don't want to have to buy them from someplace outside the village, whatever it is. And so you've got this really nice blend between the various levels of value sharing and satisfying of needs. But if conditions change a lot, you may not be able to agilely enough come up with some answers. And it may not necessarily be financial, but if we hold on to from the very beginning, as part of curiosity and appreciative inquiry as core values of this place, then the youth and the old people will always be having these discussions about, this paper lamp, thanks to the new technology, can be made out of normal paper instead of plasticized, non-flammable paper, because the LED lamp never gets hot. Okay, so there's an adaptation that I can use standard paper, which I can recycle when it goes kaput, instead of this poly whatever it is that is, and these are the things that these little small discussions between elders, between more knowledgeable in one thing and less knowledgeable in another. This is the metabolism of knowing and learning. And I think that's, especially now in our history, and based on my own life, I was super curious to know more than my father, because my father became a very conservative, he would have been a Trump follower. His reaction to my mother dying was to completely retreat and go super conservative and withdraw into being a very opinionated, narrow-minded person. So I kind of have that in me as well. Sometimes I have to be very careful. But anyway, I was so curious that I studied physics and philosophy in order to get past his Ayn Rand framed worldview. And I read all of Ayn Rand. I loved it when I was 17. And by the time I went to university for 1 year, I'm like, oh, well, that's only part of the story. So these are the processes that are normal for youth. And I had a wonderful teacher in university for intellectual history. And he just inspired tens of thousands of people over his 40 years in that school. And there's always inspiring people around, and I'd like to be one of them. That's why I decided to stop building furniture and dive back into facilitation and design. That's not necessarily designing materials, material objects.
Civilization design. So
platforms for sharing. Let's keep it keep it small and doable.
Well, yeah. For me, civilization design comes with an imperative. There's no option. We have to, because the current mode of operations is self-terminating absolutely for sure. So there will be a new design, and it can randomly emerge. Yes, it will probably, but we can try and optimize towards something better, at least. And that's
Mr. Brewer, I find is not seeing completely. I think he knows a lot more than I do. I think his sense that it's all doomed and there's no way out it's a bit too far. He's really given up. And what I've noticed in this last year is all through, even in my conservative neighborhood here, the awareness level is really rising.
Mm-hmm. So I actually never had that conversation with Joe. We had a very, very constructive conversation. And interestingly enough, Jim Rutt also warned me before having the conversation with Joe that Joe would lead it into this direction, but he didn't. I come to this conclusion. I came to this conclusion before even encountering Joe, and it's not because the awareness is not rising. The awareness is rising, but because of the systemic lock-ins are so strong that it is practically impossible to change course. So the probability, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's the probability for changing course is lower than the probability for hitting the wall.
So you know Daniel Wall's quote, we have to do the impossible because the probable is unthinkable.
Yes, beautiful. He's yeah. I wrote to him the other day that I wish I could read as much as he writes, and he has a
yes.
He's a real talent for putting stuff into words. Yes, there are scenarios that are imaginable of shifting our current mode without hitting the wall and without violence towards a new paradigm. But in my view, that new paradigm, whatever way it happens, will have certain characteristics that are common, whether it's violent and forced or whether it's smooth and non-violent. So the outcome roughly is the same. It's just the question of how much suffering, violence, and force is involved in the process. And everything we're talking about here is an exploration into what does that look like, and not into the path towards there.
Okay, that I can accept because the tendency very quickly, this is what I'm a bit afraid of when I hear pirates. Yes, I understand the pirates swear of the pilots to equal portions and really having a fair way of working together and working for common goals. That's no problem. It's the assumptions about their right to change or to influence other groups of people that I have a problem with, and that it might create conflicts that is unnecessary. And I really want to be part of trauma creating change, because there's going to be so much trauma anyway. We're seeing in America and around the world. What I asked my one of the people who I really look up to, Loea Richter, who's my trainer for systemic constellation work. I said, fall before last, when is America going to start mourning? And she said, that's a really good question, because it was really clear that I was really aware at that point of the 400 years of indigenous people extermination, everything that can be done between one race and another was done. Black people as well, the way the Chinese were used, et cetera, et cetera. So there were always these do-good projects throughout the hundreds of years. And the question is how to create regenerative change without creating shit. And that's a conversation that I want to be part of. But so terminology or coming to an understanding of how we do what we do, not necessarily the path, but how we do what we do.
Correct.
As conscientiously entering into a learning process.
And all of that, why we still have the medium to do it.
That's true.
I mean,
the order.
Let there be a solar flare, and we're done for the next couple of years, right? And a solar flare, just like the pandemic, can happen any second.
Yeah, sure.
So, and we have like a couple of minutes of warning, and then that's that. So before that, we should have aggregated as much knowledge and spread as much of that knowledge in a way that survives a breakdown of all electrical systems on the planet.
So in terms of skills, you can look back to the Whole Earth catalog, 1970s. They made a wonderful encyclopedia of all the skills needed to be a survival anywhere. It was a beautiful set of documents. And then that, who was it that went on? Kevin Kelly went on to become the founder of Wired. I probably know more of the stories than I do. Anyway, so
yeah, and the same people are now doing the Long Now Foundation, right? Which is in the same idea, basically, preserving the cultural things or knowledge that is important to preserve. And what's resonated earlier when you said you talked about Japan, was that there was a conversation on the Long Now with Julia Watson, who's written this book Low Tech, and she's using that term to describe indigenous technologies for all sorts of things like shelter, cultivating land, water, etc. And there's one interesting notion of floating houses in several locations on the planet. And these floating houses, since they're built from natural materials.
I know, I have the blueprints for one of them somewhere. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and you can yeah, it's really amazing. And but they decay within about one generation. So you're forced to renew every generation.
Right.
And what I wonder, and this is how can this be built into the social cultural fabric by design? Because I can feel, just from my personal experience right now, I can feel the tendency to cling onto material, and however desirable the next step might be, staying in the comfort, in the stuff without John Vervaeke puts it nicely. He says, we never know what we give up, and we never know what we gain. And
But you're loving your ergonomically designed chair that you're sitting on right now, right?
I'm sitting in my bed.
Oh, I thought you were sitting on a nice ergo chair.
No, no, no. I'm sitting on a bed, and it's essentially the best version of an ergonomically designed chair, because I can change position every now and then,
Yeah.
which is the most crucial thing.
Yeah.
Um, so and John Vervaeke then goes on to say, the only um, psychotechnology he's aware of to move through this space, or through this tension of not knowing what you gain and what you lose, is by play.
Mhm.
You need to enact in a safe space what is going to happen in order to explore these things. Um, and so you can do this in your mind, you can do this physically, you can do all sorts of things, but noticing how hard it is for me. So in concrete terms, we're selling the place here, and we're doing something new with that, in Costa Rica and in Berlin. In Berlin, we're buying a ship, and in Costa Rica, we're buying land and building an off-grid shelter of some kind, and and letting go of this box in a house in the city. Um, Although it's nice, but it's not sufficient for what we want to do. It's not independent. It's not intellectually, emotionally aligned with what we want to be. Um, uh, is painful, right? And if it's painful for me, then
Yeah.
and I've been doing a lot of work around all of this, and trying to understand and look forward and plan and blah blah blah, and be emotionally aligned, all of this. Then I cannot even begin to imagine how hard it is for somebody who hasn't gone through all of this work. Now, people end up in that position once they start building the comfort. After the 5-10 years, everything works, that situation is great, why change it, blah blah blah. And this is the problem I have. How can we, um, once we iterated our way there, really inherently build it into the design of our culture from the get-go to renew?
So when I was at TED 5, Daniel Bornstein, head of the Library of Congress at that time, gave a lecture. And then he talked about the basic, of course, he was an expert at thousands of things. But he wrote 2 books called, well, he wrote many books, one of which is the Discoverers and the Explorers series, okay. Which is the history of of both how we discovered and then what we developed from it as Western colonizers, as Western creators. They're 2, good-sized books. Daniel Bornstein, you can look it up. They're very easy to read. They're popularized history. And what he said was, in 1994, we know that as companies producing products and services, we have to create our brand, which is consistent with that. And we are manufacturing a buy-in with that. So we're manufacturing belief. At the same time, we're manufacturing. And the belief is much more important than the actual products or the services. We basically create the culture we want to live in as we sell the belief with our brands. You're very aware of this. This is what you do as a service designer. At that point, the religious right was rising very strongly in America, 1990 to 90. talk show hosts, the Republicans had really figured out, aha, yeah, manufacturing belief is a really good thing. Let's do that. And they were living with the repercussions 30 years later, 4 years of Trump, because of manufacturing belief. So where am I going with that? People will not give up based on a belief system which they, what is it? The artifacts that have rendered, literally rendered, painted their reality are create circular thinking. Okay, it's a self-reinforcing situation. If we want to offer a much more raw version of reality, we've already got the excuse. We have COVID. The jobs are falling away. So many people are already reduced to working in their homes. The oikos is becoming the new model of value generated from the family. As this, if it was to continue, it would be a really interesting fabrication of the fertile soil, you could say, by which we make the shift. And this is something I'm really interested in, is how long will the authorities, and they're being painted really black, really, we're crushing freedom. They're crushing our basic rights as taking them away. But what's happening is this reduction in the speed of the metabolism of our economy and society is really drawing down in amazingly short amount of time and bringing an awareness to what is sufficient. And this awareness of sufficiency is key to fighting to turning back the clock on consumerism. So manufacturing a vision out of nothing of we're going to jump off the grid is a no-go for 99% of the people, especially people in developing countries. There's nothing more than a teenager wants than a new car, just like in America in the 1960s, 70s. They are at that process where the car is a symbol of extension of their personal influence, or having their YouTube channel, or whatever it could be. In other words, it's so self-fulfilling as a prophecy of what they want to be that they can't get out of it. So this is a really interesting time. I think providing jump off the earth solutions is out of this bubble is not going to happen. I'm curious about your vision. I think the manufacturing belief towards sufficiency without changing the conditions in the larger culture is not going to be viable. Now, is that my own self-limitation? I'm not sure. My stomach says I'm right.
That's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem I'm struggling with. So let's assume you build a house. The natural tendency is for this house to be built in a way so it does not fall apart.
Yeah.
But the better way would be to build it in a way so it falls apart at a certain point in time. So we are forced to renew, or that it continuously falls apart and we continuously have to evolve it.
Yeah.
And putting that. So what is the psychotechnology, the cultural mechanic that that allows us, or that gives us the self-control to and maybe some reward for building things, creating things that have an end of lifespan. Or just two examples, concrete examples of this. You might know Daniel Schmachtenberger from the Game B community. He's currently building a news company, and that company is, or a new sense making company, and that company has a lifespan of 5 years. 5 years, and then it dies. I once had the pleasure of a very brief interaction with Elon Musk, and I asked him, so once you land on Mars, you need to set up some rules. So what are the first principles for these rules? And the first and most important he said was, every rule has a sunset period. Which means that if you don't renew it, it just goes away after a while. And that's a conscious decision, but it is a conscious decision that counteracts our natural tendency for preservation. And what I wonder is, how can there be an elegant design that that keeps this in place systemically? And that's what I'm struggling with.
Good. So 2 things, zero waste movement in Switzerland, maybe it grows, it does have impact. Is it hitting the limits of its bubble of people who will spend the time to do it? I won't do it. It's too much trouble. You know, it's this question of how much do I want to invest in something that seemingly has very little impact based on current structures and relationships in established systems.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, I live in a 100-year-old house, and I can't make it more energy efficient because I'd have to violate the facade, the beauty of the old sandstone facade. You know, and so I have a whole bunch of like stories I tell myself about why I can't do something to this building.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much self-limiting, and the only option, and I actually care. If I sell it to somebody else who doesn't care, it will never change. And so some land developer comes in and says, oh, I can build something higher, bigger, more, whatever it is. So what we've dealt with, I'm just going to jump into another topic, which is we've been dealing with a displacement way of marketing for the last 50, 60 years, where an ideology will displace another ideology just by sheer volume. We're living this at an ever accelerating rate. So the question is, how is the new reality displace the old reality? Because of it is so convincing. And this is the battle I deal with in my own house, because my wife had a brain hemorrhage last January 6th. It's been just over a year. She had one career, basically from when she was 10 years old. She was illustrating, drawing, being a very creative person. She went on to study under one of the best graphic designers in Switzerland, and did her apprenticeship there, and then went on to work in Zurich, and then in Toronto, and then San Francisco, and then she came back and taught design school, and the last 30 years, until she ran her headlong into stress-induced family troubles, financial troubles, partially because of me. I'll own it. I didn't make enough money to create the safe space for us. This is what I'm living with. And yet, what is she trying to do now? She's trying to get back to her old skill set by practicing graphic design within design and whatever it is. And the stress it's causing herself. Instead of saying, hey, I need to jump off, I need to really say, what do I love to do? What gives me energy and engagement every day to do what I love to do?
Mm.
Illustration, once again, or doing a different type of creative directorship or whatever it is that she's capable of doing. She's stuck, and therefore I'm stuck because I cannot lead her out of the box of I want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And I've given a lot of thought. So, and I work with it every day, is how to lead her to a more conscious way of living. And I'm not necessarily getting very far. So I have not answered your question. I've given you two aspects, which is displacement and stuckness. And one of the little exercises that I can recommend if you're ever with a group of people who feel really stuck is everybody stands up. So just before on a Zoom meeting, you can say, let's find 5 words that are really present with us right now.
Mm-hmm.
You name one, the other 2 people, and then we all stand up and we all act the word that was not our own. For instance, stuck could be one, innovation could be another, creativity, whatever. And just by doing this embodied practice, sometimes off camera, sometimes on camera. I did it by myself as a video process to overcome long-standing emotions stuck in my body, traumas, as a research. And I think this awareness, action-based learning is the only way to actually get through to a group of people who seek change. I'll just put a link in here for you. My colleague at Euphoria. Do you know of Euphoria? I know we have 10 minutes. Euphoria is a wonderful group here in Switzerland, now set up since about 10 years.
Okay.
And they're doing a new workshop. What is it called? Perfect Week. Perfect Week .rocks. And it just went online the day before yesterday. And come on. A little bit slow here. Excuse me, I'm 62 years old. I'm not quite so quick as you.
Don't worry, man. All good.
There's different competence sets. So anyway, Perfect Weeks. Euphoria with an F was started by a Harvard Business School graduate, Calderon. What's his name? Geronimo Calderon. He's got a group. He was part of a group in Costa Rica. He's with his wife in Santa Cruz, California. An amazing mover. Root Factor. Yeah, I'll look that up.
Yeah, that's just a little thing I created over time. That's just for when you said just told me about this week. I think that's that could be something that's somehow similar.
Okay.
But
anyway, how do we channel off here or taper off? What more would you like?
No, you've given a lot. So I totally really appreciate and respect your candid openness, which is allowing yourself to be vulnerable and open, which is a very courageous and powerful. And an important precondition for actually being able to speak about that kind of stuff. So totally appreciate that. Thank you. There were some very interesting thoughts along the way, and I'm looking forward to re-listening to that conversation. and following these thoughts with more time. So there might be a process where we as a group, so my partners Lars and Florian, and we have Oline supporting us, we might come back with a bunch of follow-up questions. And you will be kept in the loop over the year of what happens periodically, right? So once we have a plan of what will happen, is then we will let everybody know who was part of this so far. We're in the you're more than aware of the double diamond, so we're in the very far opening of a diamond, right? So we have no clue.
The long-term objective is, I love dragon dreaming. I love the idea of really envisioning what is possible in 5 years. I appreciate that I'm allowed to have no idea what I'm about to say. The wonderful thing is when you realize that your subconscious is as large as a large lake compared to your one body in it, that there's great wisdom and great folly and great trauma and great hope and all of the love that can happen all in that huge lake of our subconscious.
Yeah.
This is what's allows in a safe space or appreciative context.
My son is coming here to tell me he's done with homeschooling, and he's throwing pillows at me now.
Can you introduce him? I like young men.
Noah, Keith möchte ich gern kennenlernen.
Hello, Noah.
Right?
Hello, Noah. Hey. Noah, kannst du dir vorstellen, dass ich auch so lange Haare mit 16 gehabt habe?
Wow.
Wirklich. Und ich war Surferkind in Australien mit 16. Mit langen Haaren und einfach große Strahlen gesehen.